Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of the ENSign podcast, powered by ENS. I'm David Asiedu. I am a dispute resolution partner at ENS in Ghana. Today, we're exploring the theme future-proofing mining in Africa with reflections from Ghana and Namibia. Mining in Africa has always been a key part of the economy. We're focusing on Ghana and Namibia, two countries with huge mineral wealth and big plans for the future. But things are shifting with new technologies and a growing need for sustainability. Mining faces a lot of changes. The question is, how can these industries stay strong and keep moving forward? We'll talk about how mining is evolving in these two countries. We'll explore new technology, local rules, and environmental concerns. But we'll also look at what Ghana and Namibia are doing right and what we can learn from them. It's not an easy road, but there's a lot of potential ahead. Let's see what the future holds for mining in Africa. We have two guests on the mic today. Our first guest is Rachel Dagadu. Rachel is a partner at ENS in Ghana. She specializes in project finance, banking and finance, infrastructure, ESG and energy, and mining law, among others. Her work has been recognized by legal rankings including Chambers Global Guide, the Legal 500, and IFLR. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you, David.
Our second guest is Stephanie Bush. Stephanie is a senior associate at ENS in Namibia. She specializes in energy, mining and environmental law, and regulatory law, among others. Stephanie's work has been recognized by the IFLR. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
So am I. So I guess we will just kick it right off with my first question. What are the most significant recent legal or regulatory changes in Ghana and Namibia's mining sectors? How do they shape operations for mining companies? Let's start with Rachel.
Okay, David, thank you. I think when it comes to the mining sector in Ghana, it's one of the very prominent sectors in Ghana. So there are quite a few legal and regulatory developments in this sector in the past couple of months. Maybe I can talk about maybe about two or three of these, if not four. So the first thing that stands out for me is the fact that the Minerals Commission is developing what it calls the community development agreements. And there's supposed to be a regulation that deals with this. And what it will do is that it will require mining companies to enter into community development agreements with the communities in which they operate. Now, under the regulations, the mining companies will be required to dedicate at least 1% of their annual gross revenue to development projects which have been agreed with the various host communities. We've done some survey among some of the mining companies in Ghana, and we note that even without these regulations, they are already doing about 1% of their annual gross revenue and investing these in the host communities. So there's not too much concern when it comes to the mining companies in being able to comply with the minimum standards which are expected to be set out in the regulations. The second thing that jumps out is the laying of the environmental protection, mining and forest reserves revocation instruments in Parliament. There has been some growing apprehension in Ghana regarding illegal mining, and the agitation usually is generally stemming from the fact that illegal mining activities are leading to are having a negative effect on our water bodies and forest reserves. And initially, the law allowed the Minerals Commission to give licenses to mining companies to mine in forest reserves. And what this new LI, which has been laid in Parliament, seeks to do is to revoke the power of the Minerals Commission to give concessions in forest reserves. And we are hoping that the LI will become law very soon, and that once this becomes law, there will actually be enforcement of the law so that we do not see any mining activities in forest reserves. Another thing it's still quite new and it's being championed by the Ghana Chamber of Mines is to advocate for a passage of an Extractive Industry Fiscal Regime Act, and it's intended to serve as a framework for the collection, allocation, and management of mining revenue in Ghana. Recently, Ghana also published a new edition of the Minerals and Mining Policy. A few things stand out, one being that the government is going to be looking at setting up facilities for smelting and refining of minerals in Ghana, also providing artisanal and small-scale miners with appropriate technologies and machinery to improve recoveries, and then also the development of a green mineral strategy to reduce dependency on fossil fuels.
Thanks, Rachel. That's a lot of busyness on the Ghanaian front, or shall I say on the Western front. Stephanie, what about Namibia on the Southern front?
Well, listening to Rachel, I'm, super impressed with how much has been happening in the Ghana front. Namibia is very much, let's say, at the moment, there's no imminent laws that we're looking at that may impact the mining industry. And really, the last amendment that has occurred in relation to our mining legislation itself is dated back to 2008. So there's definitely much more, forward thinking and forward steps that can still be taken to address all of these matters that Rachel had mentioned. That being said, there are other changes within the Namibian legal framework itself that would impact mining companies. So specifically, there's legislation contemplated and is being developed relating to foreign investments. So any foreign companies that are conducting mining operations in Namibia or wanting to conduct that would be very vigilant about this new legislation that might come to pass. So this relates to the repeal of the current Foreign Investment Act that is contemplated and a new Namibia Investment and Promotion Facilitation Bill that was at some point sought to be promulgated and then sent back for to be reviewed and to be amended. So we are eagerly awaiting to obtain and see a new draft of this legislation, because it will impact the way investments can be made in the country, but also how one can disinvest from the country. So that is really one impact area where we always caution our clients to keep careful consideration because there might be changes coming in the near future.
Good stuff. Staying on our main theme of future-proofing African mining, let's shift the focus to ESG. How are companies in Ghana and Namibia adapting to the growing importance of ESG compliance? What are the challenges and benefits? Shall we start with Stephanie and Namibia now?
Thanks, David. Well, so from the ESG front, we haven't seen any legislation or regulation coming from the government's perspective about ESG. So ESG, how it's being practiced by the companies is just based on the principles that are within our existing law. So, when you look at environmental, the Environmental Management Act would require companies to set up their environmental management plans in order to receive the environmental clearance certificate to do their operations. So it's within that space that they will be working towards mining in such a fashion to have the least impact on the environment, and that also includes the local community surrounding it. So from that perspective, it's really the companies themselves that are driving the ESG component. So it's not being really pushed forward by law, but a lot of companies, just by operating globally and because of the trends, know that it is important for their social license to operate, especially in in rural areas or in small towns, that they really push forward and also integrate the communities so that the communities can have a positive impact. So we've seen that with a few mining companies that have really strived to not create stranded mining towns, but to uplift the communities that are around them. So if it's already an existing town, really putting a lot of investments and assistance from schooling and so forth into that town. But also when they create, when there's a mine that's like very far away from other cities, assisting with the creation of these mining towns, but also looking how will these towns continue operating once the mine is gone or has commenced operation.
Yes, interesting. So, Rachel, what's the situation in Ghana? Is ESG also largely company-driven, or is it state-driven?
So when it comes to Ghana, I think there's a lot of regulation of mining activities when it comes to, if you're looking at it from the E part of ESG. So in terms of an environmental compliance regime, it's quite well established. But when I speak to persons in the mining industry in Ghana, the single idea that appears to drive their discussion is that mining companies have for decades been aware of ESG compliance, and that for some time they've been developing policies and practices that will guide their ESG compliance. I believe it will not be strange, and perhaps Stephanie will agree with me, to find persons in the mining sector who are of the opinion that mining companies have been the most ESG compliant prior to all this buzz, and I put buzz in quotes, around ESG. I think that there's perhaps an edge now and probably more competition to do more. One example I can give is that even in Ghana, we have seen mining companies trying to use cleaner fuels to power their mining trucks and their mining equipment. For example, we are currently assisting a client in connection with a prospective modular LNG plant in the Western region. And this will supply LNG to one of the major mining companies in Ghana for use in their mining trucks. And I understand that this project will be the first time LNG is used in mines in Africa. I don't know how far that's true, but that's the understanding I get. And it appears there are a couple of other mining companies in Ghana who are looking at cleaner fuels to power their trucks. That said, when it comes to on the government side, the Minerals Commission is also seeking to reintroduce what it calls the ACOBEN program. And the ACOBEN program is an environmental performance rating and disclosure initiative. And it will publish and rank environmental performance of member companies. My feel is that mining companies are quite accepting of this program, other than some reservation that I see on financial contributions that they may be required to make to the program and how they can capture that financial contribution when it comes to their accounting. When it comes to social programs, wow, there's every mining company in Ghana will have a long list of social initiatives that they are making outside the regulatory regime. Some of them are actually looking at projects that are not necessarily related to mining. So they are looking at funding communities to engage in agriculture, and hairdressing and tailoring and others. So I think I must say that I will not disagree with mining companies that they have for a long time in ESG compliance. but they are looking at doing more. So
I was wondering at which point in time during this podcast an ESG naming and shaming would come up. Now we know Ghana is planning one, a sin list presented as an awards program.
I know, right?
So moving on to local content. How have local content policies influenced mining operations in Ghana and in Namibia? Are these policies achieving their intended goals? Rachel, let's start with you on local content.
I think local content is a buzzword in Ghana now, and every sector is looking at implementing local content policies. And definitely one of those sectors is the mining industry. So we do have quite a number of laws that govern local content in the mining industry. And we have the Minerals and Mining Act, and we have the Minerals and Mining Local Content and Local Participation Regulations. We have the Minerals and Mining General Regulation, and then the Minerals and Mining Support Services Regulation. And then we also have the mining list. And if you look through all these regulations, you see that there's a drive towards encouraging local participation in the mining industry, especially when it comes to support services. And if you look at the mining list, every year, new services are added, which are reserved for Ghanaians. And so you see, sometimes you do see some pushback on the ability of local companies to be able to make the supplies reserved for them under the mining list. And we also see employment and ownership opportunities for Ghanaians. Then we see a requirement for a transfer of technology. So the mining companies are encouraged or required to train locals for every role in which a foreign person sits at the moment.
Interesting stuff about the local content space in Ghana, Rachel. I had a question I wanted to ask you, but I'll wait for Stephanie to give us her take on local content in Namibia, and then maybe I'll ask both of you that question. Stephanie?
In the Namibian mining sector, there's not a specific local content policy. We're seeing the Ministry of Mines and Energy is currently developing one for the petroleum sector, which has obviously become quite a hot topic on our end. But for the mining sector, there isn't one. So currently, local content is regulated in terms of the Minerals Prospecting and Mining Act, in that it provides for qualitative local content requirements. So when I say qualitative, it requires companies best as they can possibly to employ Namibian. So, for example, to give preference to Namibian citizens, or with due regard to ensure technical and economic efficiency to make use of products in Namibia as far as they're available. So there's not a specific quota that's included or how one goes about it. However, it's in the act that one should try its best, basically. And from a local ownership perspective, the mining licenses can be issued with local ownership requirements, such as 5% needs to be held by Namibians, or sometimes also previously disadvantaged Namibians, as the term is coined within our country. So, but although there is no specific mining local content legislation, there is a local content legislation being developed generally, and that has been for quite some many years now already, and it's called the National Equitable Economic Empowerment Bill, where there has been many reiterations of that draft, and that act envisages that the minister that will be responsible for the act can set up certain sectors and where certain local content requirements and quotas will be imposed, and this may impact then the company's ability to even apply for a license. So this is also a piece of legislation that we're eagerly waiting to see a next draft of, and to see if it will be promulgated in future, because that will also impact the industry.
Interesting stuff about the expected legislation. I'll move on to the next topic of the future of mining in Africa. Looking ahead, what key trends or innovations will shape the mining industry in Africa? Let's focus on Ghana and Namibia and the next decade. Stephanie, shall we begin with you?
Okay, so from my perspective, also being a lawyer that very much focuses on renewable energy work, I see the green trend, the decarbonized trend, hopefully setting sail in Namibia. So there are two factors driving that. So firstly would be that we're seeing many countries moving towards decarbonizing and moving towards renewable energy offtake. And that's really being spurred on by what is called the modified single buyer model rules that have been published, allowing for large consumers of electricity to directly obtain energy from third parties and not just from our power utility. So that has driven a major influx of renewable energy projects being constructed, and also for the purpose specifically for offtake by mining companies. So there's obviously a lot of different reasons for that. Mining companies need secure energy. So from a perspective of rather deflecting from the grid to ensure that one doesn't, Namibia doesn't have load shedding. However, we do receive most of our electricity from South Africa. So we've seen many companies just wanting to make sure that they secure that energy supply of theirs. And then it's also, in many cases, more economic than to, for example, discuss and obtain a grid extension to the mine to actually just have a power station nearby or on the property. So that is one of the trends. The other one is specifically in relation to green hydrogen. So although green hydrogen wouldn't impact mining per se, in Namibia it might very well impact the beneficiation of the minerals being mined within Namibia and the region. And so we've seen one green steel project, but there are many others currently being developed, which would entail developing and so taking iron and producing green iron basically through green hydrogen use. And so one of the projects is the High Iron Project, which is the first in the African region to produce or seeking to produce green iron. And we're seeing a lot of investors being very interested in jumping into that space in Namibia just because of the great green hydrogen potential that we have in our country already.
So on that score, it sounds very much that Namibia is future-proofing her mining sector. Rachel, what about Ghana? What key trends or innovations do you see shaping the mining industry over the next decade?
So I think maybe the first one I'll mention is the drive towards finding and using cleaner energy to power mining equipment and mining trucks. The second thing that I would mention is how we are looking at diversifying our mineral resources and inclusion of green mining. And Ghana is taking great strides in this emerging sector. And right now we are looking at implementing what we call the Awuya lithium project. This mine is located in the central region and is developed by a company called Atlantic Lithium and set up to be Ghana's first lithium producing mine. First production is expected in second quarter of 2025. When it comes to the key trends or innovations in mining in Ghana, I think the first one I'd like to mention is the fact that a lot of mining companies in Ghana are looking at changing the energy or fuel that they use. And most of them are now looking at finding greener fuels to power their mining equipment and their mining trucks. The second thing that Ghana appears to be doing well in is critical minerals. And we recently launched the Awuya lithium project. And this is a mine in the central region, and it's being developed by the Atlantic Lithium. and is set up to be Ghana's first lithium producing mine. They are expected to start production in second quarter of this year. We also have the Minerals and Mining Policy, as I mentioned earlier, and the second edition recently came out. And Ghana seeks to address the inclusion of green mining by setting out the development of a green mineral strategy to reduce dependency on fossil fuels. Ghana also, as I mentioned earlier, Ghana also recently published the second edition of the Minerals and Mining Policy. It's supposed to address the inclusion of green mining, and we are looking at setting up a green mineral strategy to reduce dependency on fossil fuels. With the global shift towards ESG compliance, mining companies are really focusing on their E and S compliance especially. And I was recently at a Ghana Chamber of Mines meeting in Kumasi. And one thing that appears to run through is that a lot of the mining companies are looking at better ways of mining and are looking at more efficient ways of mining. They're looking at doing more when it comes to social compliance, and ESG appears to be at the forefront of mining in Ghana, at least when it comes to the mining companies. I cannot say the same for the illegal miners though. So I think the future is bright, and I see the mining companies leading ESG compliance in Ghana.
Thanks, Rachel. Finally, I give listeners the rare occasion or the rare chance on which they get free mining advice from Rachel and Stephanie. My final question is, what advice would you give to mining companies looking to enter the Ghanaian or Namibian markets? Let's start with you, Stephanie.
I think one good advice to provide to anybody looking into coming to the country is, it might sound very simple and obvious, but it's really to get a very good human resources function, because our labor laws in Namibia are actually quite stringent, and we have a very strong and influential labor union specifically in the mining sector. Yes, because sometimes that's like really overlooked, and then at a later point, then the lawyers are called to help them. But sometimes it's good to really get your ducks in a row from the start.
So HR and employment functions. Is there anything else?
I mean, just beside that, just to say that from Namibia is seen as a very good investment destination, just because we have very stable courts, and our political regime is also very stable. So not an advice, but actually an encouragement to have a look and see what the country is all about, and specifically all the potential that we have from a mining perspective.
Great stuff. Rachel, your free advice.
So just to mention three things. The first is that a mining company looking to come into Ghana must understand the legal and regulatory framework in Ghana. The mining industry in Ghana is quite a complex environment. It's governed by many acts, as we see, policies and regulations, and these are constantly developed. The sector is actually quite a very well-developed sector in Ghana, and it's advisable to engage a lawyer at the beginning of the process to ensure compliance with the legal requirements in order to avoid penalties, and also to understand the license, permitting, and approval process. The second thing that's very important is to establish good community relationships. As mentioned, the success of a mine operation will hinge on the support of the local communities, and a mining company that seeks to enter into the Ghanaian market must proactively consult with the local community, and then must also be prepared to invest in infrastructure, education, healthcare, and other social programs relating for the purposes of the host communities. The company will also must be ready to compensate landowners and communities who are going to be displaced by the mining activities. The last advice I have is that the company needs to be prepared to adapt. There may be operational challenges, such as limited availability of locally manufactured goods that meet the company's standards. There may be logistical challenges, especially in remote areas. Sometimes we do not have a very good road network in Ghana. And we must also be willing to adapt to the presence of illegal miners. And there are times when illegal miners do enter mining concessions which have been legally granted by the Minerals Commission. So it will be a learning curve and things will change. But with resilience, I think the investments will pay off. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's about all time will allow us. Listeners, Rachel and Stephanie have been talking about future-proofing mining in Africa. It's clear that the future of mining in Africa is about finding balance. Ghana and Namibia show that progress and sustainability can go hand in hand when approached thoughtfully. The mining sector has an opportunity to reshape its impact, not just for industries, but for the communities and environments it touches. It's not without challenges, but there's so much potential to create lasting change. Rachel and Stephanie, thank you so much for sharing your great insights on the now and the future of mining in Africa.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, David. It's been a
pleasure. Thank you. And listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of the ENSign podcast. Please look out for another episode soon. Bye now.